Wow, I got a bit of a rough road ahead of me for now. I know I got to cover a classic like Dragon Warrior 3 on the NES, but after this I got Britney's Dance Beat for the GBA, and not to mention down the line I gotta cover Shin Megami Tensei Persona 4. Then again, after Britney's Dance Beat, Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne is a pretty good game, and that's another story. Anyway, if I have to cover a bad game, I would rather cover a game like Test Drive Off-Road rather than a game like Britney's Dance Beat. Why? Because Britney's Dance Beat has an element of fear. I know it's going to suck, but how hard? The other reason is that I started off somewhat liking Britney's Dance Beat, and it got worse over time. Test Drive Off-Road, I went too blind. I got it for $5 Canadian on a whim, because why not? It was also very direct in how bad it was. Within 15 minutes, I saw every single problem this game had. It's still pretty awful, but at least it didn't torture me with its potential or a reason to keep playing. As far as the history's concerned, this is a classic tale of the internet confusing people who are trying to get information on this game. Wikipedia and almost everybody else credits Electronic Arts as the developer, Accolade as the publisher, and it was released on February 20th, 1997, while the manual credits Elite Systems as the developer. This left me confused when I looked at the back of the manual for the credits, but that could be chalked up to it being in really bad shape. Yet it only confused me worse when I checked IGN.com, and it doesn't have any developer credited. Now, if memory serves me right, back then, Electronic Arts weren't the juggernaut we know them as now. They were working in collaborative efforts with a bunch of different teams, so it wouldn't surprise me if they had a hand in the game's development. Every other site credits Elite as the guys who worked on the PC version, but we are looking at the PlayStation 1 version today. As far as the people involved, let's start off with Accolade. Accolade was a long-running game developer and publisher studio that started in 1984 and sadly went out of business in 1999. According to Wikipedia, it was founded by former employees Alan Miller and Bob Whitehead. According to legend, they named themselves Accolade because it came before Activision alphabetically, implying that Accolade was superior to the previous company. For a while, Accolade was a pretty good company. Some of the game franchises Accolade helped start up by publishing are some that late 80s, early 90s PC fans would call classics, such as the Test Drive, Star Control, and Hardball series. So the other titles they had hand in publishing were Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, along with its sequel called The Jaws of Cerberus, the Sega Genesis version of Double Dragon, Pinball Wizard for DOS, among others. Most of it early on was only on PC, but that was just as the console market was trying to recover after the great gaming crash of the mid-80s. Where it got bad was around the mid-90s. They became a shovelware company like Acclaim. Sure, they published a console port of the classic 2D shooter in Turrican, and they had marked no success in BuzzFeed for the Sega Genesis. The thing is that around 1994 it went downhill. They were publishing mediocre to downright awful games. Games like Busby and Fractured Fury Tales for the Atari Jaguar, PO'd for 3DO, fighting game that's said to be one of the worst of all time in Balls, along with a game that is said to be one of the worst games of all time in Busby 3D. They even published Balls for the 3DO. That was just at the start of their problems. After a few good Test Drive sequels, these games kinda got worse depending on who you talk to with the creation of Test Drive Road series. In 1999, some people had to have figured the end was near. They were bought out by Infogrames, and some of their franchises now continue on, like Test Drive with the Test Drive Unlimited series. Last bit of history before we get into the game itself. Upon research, a few companies went to about naming themselves the way as Accolade. Oddly enough, Acclaim was formed by ex-Activision employees, and Absolute Entertainment was started up by ex-Accolade employees. If we want to go even further, Activision was started up by former Atari employees with the same philosophy behind their name. There's also a common thread between Acclaim, Accolade, and Absolute Entertainment. They all aren't around anymore. Sure, Atari is no longer around, but Activision proved to be the better company in the long run. Out of them all, Acclaim lasted the longest, and that's another story. Just a bit of history and a lesson for those doing business. Just take the higher ground. I know the company may have misused your talent. The thing is that the second that you let on that you're spiteful and you go into business thinking you're going to kick the crap out of your former company, then you already lost. Go ask Eric Bischoff when he purposely tried to put WWE out of business when he ran WCW. He ended up being the one game his company put out of business. As for the one developer I found to take credit for either the PC or PlayStation 1 versions of Test Drive Off-Road, known as Elite Systems. They're actually surprisingly still around. According to Wikipedia, they were originally known as Richard Wilcox Software, and only one title was published, Blue Thunder for the ZX Spectrum, Atari 8-bit computers, and the Commodore 64. In August 1984, the group was relaunched under the name Elite Systems, expanding the team to include graphics designers and so forth. Their first release under the new Elite Systems label was Coco Tony Wilf or something like that, which also carried the first of their anti-counterfeiting holograms on the cassette inlay card. At the 1986 Golden Joystick Awards, Elite was awarded Software House of the Year by Computer and Video Game Magazine. In 1989, it got Game of the Year award for Paperboy by the British software industry. Around 2003, with the rise of the popularity of mobile games, Elite began to publish games with a focus on conversions of classic games. Elite has also developed and published some new games such as AVP. So in essence, they're born and raised mobile or independent development team. So after the more than 2-page long bit of history, let's get into the game itself. There really is no story to the game. What you see is what you get. You get a bunch of different tracks to drive around on, vehicles like the Land Rover and the Hummer. The graphics haven't aged well at all. This was a 1997 PlayStation 1 game, and it looks like hell. Vehicle models look awful. They all look like big rectangular blobs. I've seen Matchbox cars look a lot better than this. The levels aren't much better either. I went and played Gran Turismo, which came out 1 year later, and it's almost unreasonable going back and playing racing games in the middle era between the SNES and Gran Turismo. So it's almost unfair looking back and calling judgment on the graphics for games like this or Need for Speed 2. It looks comparable to a game like Need for Speed 2, it's just that Polyphony Studios has made games from this era hard to look back at. To top it all off, the frame rate stinks. This game chugs often when you get more than 2 cars on screen at the same time. The last bit kills any sympathy I have for it, and it just screams poor quality. The audio isn't much better either. Its biggest issue is that unless I turn the sound effects and voiceover off or max out the music volume, then I could barely hear the music over everything else. I know it's supposed to make it more realistic, but this is just bad mixing. Every other racing game I have ever played had figured out how to do this, and somehow, when something I think every studio should know better than not to do, someone comes out and proves me wrong. Even when I did listen to the soundtrack, it's so bland that it's annoying. Every bit of music has this cheesy, straight out of a mid-90s 3D game kind of hard rock music. It has absolutely no soul and just annoys me every time I hear it. The gameplay is garbage, but at least it's upfront about how bad it is. It took me around 30 to 45 minutes to see everything, and it's all bad. Let's get the list out ready again, so I can explain what this game does to not only be annoying, not only one of the worst driving games I've ever played, but one of the worst games I've ever played in my life. First and foremost, above all the other problems, the biggest is that the controls stink. I have played the game with friction on and off. Either way, it controls like a 5-year-old throwing a fit. It just does what it wants to. Sometimes you will be able to make a turn no problem. Other times you can barely control your car. You'll drive so many times into walls it will drive you crazy. Now, if you turn the friction on, the controls get even worse. You can barely even turn the car at all. I know it's supposed to be realistic, but if I can barely control the car at all, we got serious problems. Realistic is having to ease your speed into turns. Test Drive Off-Road has you make a complete stop before you can even think about making a turn. Add on the suspect and collision detection, and this is one of the worst controlling racing games I have ever played in my life. The next problem is that the game is one of those few games you can't just restart a race. You have to quit out and either restart the cup or load up back from the last time you saved. I rarely ever see a game do this, and for good reason. It's stupid and annoys players, especially when you got to go through at least 3 loading screens to try to race again. Number 3, there's so little content in this game that Super Mario Kart has around as much. There is only 8 cars and 4 of them being unlocked from the start, and only 12 tracks total. I don't care if Mario Kart was on the SNES and Test Drive Off-Road was on the PlayStation 1. If you can unlock everything in one night, barring the controls actually working, then either give me more unlockable vehicles and tracks, or give me a reason to keep playing this stinking game. Next off, this game's artificial intelligence is all over the place. The developers knew they botched the artificial intelligence of the other racers, so they put the difficulty on easy. If you play this on normal, unless you are a test drive off-road god, first place will be half a lap ahead of you while the other racers just drive around like teenagers who just got their license. The rest of the racers, they drive like a pack of morons, giving you the feeling that, oh, I might actually have a chance to win this. So if you want to see all of what this train wreck has to offer, calling itself a game, suck up your pride and play on easy mode. One of the biggest issues I have is that if you try to change the camera view, I've seen this game throw a fit. I've tried to change camera angles before, and at times it would throw fits. Like just flip out all over the place because of whatever reason it is. It doesn't happen often, but it's funny when it does. Final nail in the coffin is that the speed is all over the place because the physics are worthless. You go from 0 to full speed and back in around 5 seconds. It's not that it picks up speed too fast, it's that you get no explanation on why it's happening. At one point you may be speeding up a hill, and then you'll randomly go as fast as grandma on her scooter on an open dirt road. So when you wrap up all these elements, you get a completely broken game. Nothing works at all, and quite frankly, this is the guardian at the gates for you to be one of the worst games from a gameplay standpoint. As in, if you're worse than Test Drive Off-Road from a gameplay standpoint, you really are something special. And I'm not talking special as in unique, I'm talking about, you know, a real head case. Overall, Test Drive Off-Road is like test driving on lemon. It might work at first, but after 3 days it falls apart. This is a textbook example of a publisher slowly going out of business because they were publishing garbage like this. Almost nothing works here, and almost nothing is salvageable. It gets a merciful 1 out of 10. The mercy point is for the fact that it took me less than an hour to figure out that this is 100% pure turd. Way to go, Elite Systems, if you actually developed this game. You proved why you are a developer of mobile games now. Take your spot on the Wall of Shame.